So in other words, we have two papers using similar data finding the opposite answer. Now that doesn't necessarily, here's the reason why I wanted to emphasize that. It's not necessarily true that that means that the first one was wrong. It could be that this is exactly how it is. So here's the sort of nice insight if you think about it. A lot of this is informal insurance, right? All of this is informal. There's no contract. I help you because I expect you'll help me if I got into the same place. It's entirely informal. That means that it has to be self-enforcing. It's not enforced by some legal contract. I can't sue you if you don't help me. I'm really asking for help here, right? I don't have a contract with you. There's no court where we sign this. It's just mutual help. These are people who are saying, well, you're in bad state, I'll help you. I expect that if I were in a similar bad state, you'll help me. So in other words, these are mutual insurance contracts which come from sort of our agreeing together that we're going to do it, but they have they're not legally binding. Now think about what happens when somebody deviates from this. Somebody suddenly turns around and says, no, I'm not going to help you, for whatever reason. Well, my reaction is, fine, I'm not going to help you either. Right? But that means that there are potentially multiple equilibria. If I expect you to help me in the future, I'll help you now. If I expect you not to help me in the future, I won't help you now. So you can easily imagine each of these being an equilibrium. If our expectations are positive about each other, we could be in an equilibrium where we help each other. Our expectations were negative about each other, we could be in an equilibrium where we all refuse to help each other. That means that depending on what we expect the equilibrium play to be, we could have very different outcomes. Right now, I just want you to hold on to this one thought, that all of these things, there's no enforcement, so they're enforced by our optimism. If I expect an equilibrium every period, so think of tomorrow. Tomorrow, if I expect day after you're going to be happy to help me, then I'm going to be willing to help you tomorrow. Knowing that you're going to help me, you're going to be willing to help me tomorrow, I'll be willing to help you today. Why do I say that? Because that can explain why some places it works and some places it doesn't. It depends entirely on how optimistic we are about the others. If I'm pessimistic, then not helping you is the right behavior for me, but knowing that that's the right behavior for you, etc. Okay. You see why? So that I mentioned that because I want to emphasize that there's nothing surprising about these things not working. They might work, they might not, but that means that there is a space for other institutions, formal contracts. Formal contracts are important because they're less fragile. We can have different kinds of formal contracts. We could have formal contracts that are enforced through the government. The government taxes people and then helps people who are in trouble. Or there could be formal contracts through markets. But all of those have the advantage that they're enforceable. They don't depend on our each being optimistic.
Without the government, I think maybe it's enforceable because people can find a way to, like, kind of tit for tat. Like they can find a way to punish the people, the person who deviate once, and then maybe they will reach an equilibrium which is better for everyone, and there is no incentive for any person.
Absolutely. So there is an equilibrium where it's tit for tat. If you help me, I'll help you. That doesn't rule out the fact that that same game has an equilibrium which is the opposite, which is I refuse to help you, therefore you refuse to help me, and so on. Tit for tat works both ways. If I help you, then you help me is an equilibrium. If I don't help you, you don't help me is an equilibrium. So both are equilibria. That's exactly the point I'm trying to make, which is that you could be, maybe in Cote d'Ivoire, they're in the bad equilibrium, and in India, they're in the good equilibrium. And this says nothing about the potential for insurance through these means. It is still possible to help each other. We just don't do it in equilibrium because we happen to be in the bad equilibrium. That's I take your point. I think that's tit for tat is something that works if it's an equilibrium, but we could have another equilibrium which isn't that. Now the point that I want you to take away from that is that insurance of these kinds tend to be fragile. If I start to doubt that you'll help me, I'll start refusing to help, and then the whole thing will unravel. So one reason why people have often said things unravel is, imagine that we get a little more social mobility. People's, in the old days, nobody ever left the village. Now some people slowly are trickling out of the village. Now when you leave the village, you're no longer part of the network. So if people get a little more footloose, the whole thing might unravel, because I might expect that, look, by the time I come to ask you for help, maybe you're gone. So I'll say no today, knowing that you would have said no yesterday, and so on. So once the probability of people moving goes up a little bit, we might see very different outcomes. We might see much less insurance because there's a little bit more mobility in the society. Do you have a question? Okay. So this is just a thought to keep in mind. I didn't show you any evidence that that's what's happening, but when you think about these things, when you think about informal insurance versus formal insurance, this is a conceptual point to keep in mind, that informal insurance could be very effective, but could be fragile. It depends a bit on how people think.